Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Vijay Anand. I'm one of the vice presidents at an organization called FACE, and we are based in India and serving the college education market. I am the host for today's session, and I'm delighted to introduce John Alessi. Welcome, John.
Hello.
John.
Hello, Vijay.
So John is the director of LivEnglish in the UK, and he has been helping schools across the world in augmenting their English language teaching programs, as well as giving better learning experiences for students. Now this session is where John's going to explain a unique approach to English language teaching in schools, which potentially can help school teachers as well as heads of school rethink how they currently teach language, or maybe look at improving certain areas based on what we want to refer to as CEFR here. So welcome all of you to today's session. I hope this will be a fruitful session for all of you attending. And towards the end of this session, we'll also open the floor for Q&A. Over to you, John, for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. It's definitely a pleasure, and yeah, I hope you'll find this session interesting and useful. There's quite a lot of information in this session, and quite a few slides. So, theoretically, each slide could probably use or need the time for an individual webinar, but I think today we'll just go through an overview of things, and of course we can always follow up and ideally end up working with the schools and the teachers and the administrators, so that we can actually learn by doing, which is one of the principles that we will be explaining today. Very little. Just a very little bit about myself. I've been, as I said, as Vijay mentioned, I'm a director at LivEnglish.co.uk, which is a relatively newly formed company where people from various other companies with many years of experience have come together to build this new organization. And the main aim of the organization really is to bring our expertise, bring our years of experience to the English language domain across the globe, and really be of assistance to schools, to teachers, and then ultimately and fundamentally to students. If that's the end result, that's the end product, and that's where we're, that's where all the direction we're all going towards, and what we all want to achieve. As you can see from my very, very brief CV there, I've been a teacher myself for many years. I've managed schools. I've been in the business side of education, and again, in my current role, I basically do a bit of everything. So all of these roles combined. But enough about myself. Let's get into the session. The focus of today's session is the CEFR, the Common European Frame of Reference. Now, you all heard about it. You'll find it everywhere in course books, in texts, in documents, in government policy, but not a lot of people really have a very, very in-depth understanding of what it is, what its origins are, why did it come to existence, and what's the purpose of it, and how fundamentally, most importantly, does it have an effect on what we can actually do in a classroom, and how can this benefit students. So the CEFR as a project really started in the 70s. However, the first publication of the CEFR, the first version of it is dated 2001, where we had the first sort of a set of standards, the first set of band descriptions. And you're all familiar, I'm sure, with the band descriptors A1 to C2 and what they mean in terms of the levels they represent. Very, very, very important in the 2018 to a very recent 2020 period has been further implementation and extension of the CEFR, where additions, fundamental additions have been made. adding descriptors of what someone can do with the language when it also comes to online interaction, collaborative learning, mediation, and other skills that then reflect in what we do in everyday life and describe some of the fundamental skills that employers, but also the world of academia, are looking now for in candidates. You've heard about critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration, digital skills, etc., etc. They're discussed in conferences left and right. I believe in India there's a Skills Council of India as well, per sector. But very few people know what they actually mean in concrete terms. So how do you actually teach critical thinking? How do you teach problem solving? So the CFR went back a step and said, okay, let's describe them first. Let's describe what a person can actually do in practical terms, so that we can then define and we can then see how well they can do critical thinking, as an example, or how well can they collaborate, how creative can they be with their communication and their problem solving. Okay, so what the CFR has done has created a vast database, again, in bands A1 to C2, of how people can showcase those skills. So beyond the original remit, which was really about written skills, writing skills, spoken skills in a very traditional way, you know, where grammar obviously is quite important, vocabulary is still quite important. The CFR is important. It's important internationally, it's important globally. It is everywhere, whether we like it or not. The CFR was created by the European Council of Europe. It's a combined effort by universities, institutions, and government organizations from around Europe. But obviously this has now expanded beyond Europe and it's prevalent around the world. You as teachers or administrators are fully aware of the fact that, for instance, when you teach students, very often you prepare them for an exam, and exam bodies such as, for instance, the British Council or others for exams such as the IELTS, TOEFL, PTE for Pearson, for instance, all their exams and all their assessment is based on the CFR. Basically, they've taken the CFR, they've taken the descriptors, and they say, okay, you know, we want a student to be able to do this. What does it mean in the CFR? Okay, this is what it translates to into an IELTS score. So the CFR is the basis of everything. Governments fundamentally use the CFR to inform their education and their immigration policy. We know that to go and work abroad in many English-speaking countries, for instance, you need to pass an IELTS exam. Governments actually in their policies clearly define CFR achievement goals. You know, student needs to be a B1 or a potential immigrant needs to be B2, depending on the kind of job they have. Now, obviously some exams will be approved rather than others, but it all boils down to the CFR and how the government wants a potential candidate to achieve that score. Schools and universities do that all the time in their recruitment policy. For instance, again, you need to have a CFR level and therefore then take an exam potentially, or be able to demonstrate that you have that CFR level. Publishers and curriculum developers in the language domain, but not only nowadays, even beyond just pure language domain, are using the CFR to describe their course books, to inform their material creation. And last but not least, business and employers. Business and employers more and more predominantly look for language skills that go beyond now just purely grammar and vocabulary, but also their ability of potential candidates to be creative, to be problem solvers, to be team leaders. Hence, again, going back to the CFR, which is now able to assess those candidates from those point of view, the point of view of soft skills, soft communicative skills that are valid in whichever sector you work in. The CFR has a direct influence on teaching methodology, or possibly the other way around. Maybe teaching methodology informed the CFR. What came first, the chicken or the egg? You may ask. Back in the 70s, people started looking at new ways of teaching. You know, the top-down grammar translation way of teaching was becoming a little bit obsolete. And I guess, like anything in the 70s, people started looking at new ways, you know, hippie ways perhaps, to teach and to be more effective. So, you know, the first instances of a communicative approach, of task-based learning, which incidentally was first in its purest form, first implemented by an expert in India. And we can talk about it some other time. And then other concepts like flipped learning, teacher becoming no longer the pure giver of information top down, but just a teacher becoming a facilitator, helping students communicate. Concepts like learning by doing. So, you know, do something real. Use your language to complete a real task. Don't just, you know, use your language to fill in gaps in a grammar exercise. You know, in real life, how often does any of you have to fill in a grammar exercise to fill in gaps? Personally, even as a teacher, very, very, very little. Only if I'm preparing some homework for students. But in real life, most people will never have to do that. What we have to do is communicate a message. Project-based learning. Work on real projects. Use the language to complete. That's where the problem solving, the creativity learning takes place. You know, set real tasks to people. Focus on meaning versus focusing on form. You know, focusing on form being the grammar. You know, focusing on the grammar. You know, completing grammar, understanding the grammar. Again, how often do you go out for dinner and talk about grammar to anyone? You know, you talk about something else. You use the grammar. The grammar is a supporting skill, but really what you're focusing on is the meaning. What you see there is also the dogme approach, which is probably the most radical of the communicative approaches, whereby teachers actually, and I'm not advocating this by all means, but some proponents believe that that's a fantastic approach to learn language, where teachers actually don't prepare very, very minimal lessons, and you just walk into a class and you just start talking about something and get students to talk about something. You know, you just pick up an object and off you go. Try and teach a lesson for an hour. Quite challenging, I have to say, but again, a methodology aimed at stimulating real communication, solving real problems. Okay, and on the left-hand side of this slide, we're talking about employers want workers who have communication skills, can work collaboratively in teams. So again, what came first, the need of employers or academia for people who are able to use this methodology, or did the methodology then inform what employers actually needed? It is hard to say what came first, but there's no doubt that this is what is actually needed. So all of these, each one of these terminologies on the right, you know, again, you could spend probably an hour or more discussing each one of them, but they all boil down to the concept of how do we teach in a new way, putting the student and the meaning of what we're saying before any form or any very regimental approach to teaching. And obviously, that's what it means. What the consequence is that methodology inform the CFR, or a CFR inform the methodology, and following that, obviously, we come to what do we use in the actual classroom. Please bear in mind that the CFR itself is not a course. The CFR is not a curriculum. The CFR is not a set of tasks or homework. the CEFR is merely simply a description of what students or what anybody, it doesn't even have to be a student, any person can do with the language. And the better they're able to perform, the higher up they are on this scale. The more proficient, the more accurate the communication, the better the speaker would fit with the description higher up those bands. But it is not a course. So what happens is that course creators, publishers, and ultimately teachers have had the need to use the CEFR to then create tasks, to then create course books, for instance, homework, for instance, tasks, spoken, written tasks based on what the CEFR described. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, I'm just going to follow the CEFR and I'm just going to take, okay, let's see some band descriptors and I'm going to just read them out in the class, and nothing happens there. It's just a description, and then there's a lot of work to be done in bringing it to life in the classroom, and say, okay, how can I take my student from an A1 level where he's able to do this with the language to an A2 level where he's able to be a little bit more sophisticated with his language, or all the way up to C2 where he's perfectly fluent, extremely sophisticated, and really detailed with the level of meaning that he's able to convey. The CEFR, as I said earlier, probably my first slide, obviously looks at the traditional production skills, what we know as spoken skills, written skills, the traditional comprehension skills, listening and reading. We all know about the 4 skills. And with the addition now of interactive and mediation skills. Now, again, only touching these 2 points will probably take a few hours of presentation and discussion about what interaction and mediation mean. But when we talk about mediation, we're not talking about, well, potentially it could be a police officer mediating the release of someone who's kidnapped. But by mediation, we're actually talking about being able to understand the message from one source and then mediating it in our own words and our own understanding it and conveying it to someone else, whether on a face-to-face level or on a written form or on online written form, and so on. So quite a sophisticated range of skills required in mediation. And interaction it's not just about, okay, I'm interacting, so I'm listening and I'm responding potentially, because that could be just simply described as speaking and listening skills. Interaction has a lot of nuance in its meaning. So interaction in terms of understanding not only the words how they are spoken, but also what the person is trying to say, also being able to empathize, to understand the nuances of the meaning, to understand the feelings that the person is trying to convey. So not just simply a basic grammar structure. So interaction is far more sophisticated. Again, in the middle of this slide, right in the middle, there's a couple of questions for you. Questions on which you can simply reflect. I'm not necessarily asking you to write an essay about them or to respond right here and right now. I just want you to thinking about your classroom, thinking about the school environment, and what you want your students to achieve, what their goals should be. What do you think interaction and mediations are, and why are they so important? Why should they almost take center stage in language teaching, take precedence over, might be controversial here, but take precedence over the teaching of grammar and vocabulary? Why would that be the case? Yeah, could you think of real life interaction mediation skills and how they differ from production and comprehension. I'll give you a few hints earlier on in when I was trying to describe them, but sometimes it's good to think about real examples. What would my student be interacting, and when would my student be mediating? Like, envisage a real situation and teach it, practice it. That's my tip for authors and teachers and policymakers, because ultimately, unfortunately, sometimes teachers and authors are limited by what the policy is on teaching, what we have to teach, what boxes do we need to tick so that our policymakers are happy. Not necessarily always to the full benefit of students. So to me, what is important, what is fundamental, is to put learners at the center of the teaching experience. Ultimately, we're doing this for them. We're not doing it for ourselves. Of course, we're doing it for ourselves. It's our job, and we're earning a salary, and that's what we do. But the goal, the overriding goal, is we're teaching the students because we want to give them a better opportunity in life, giving them a head start, giving them the opportunity to get a great job, to access a fantastic university, and therefore they need to be at the center of the experience. They need to be able to say, okay, I am a better communicator, I am a better employee, I can tackle this issue, I can solve this problem, or at least I have learned the skills that will allow me to solve this problem. What I also recommend always to teachers, and what I try to take on board in my experience also as a teacher, is to use real life context and real communication needs in the classroom. Now, this is not always that easy to replicate what happens in real life, in the classroom. You could always, you can argue it's always a bit of a simulation. It will never be 100% realistic that a student needs to buy a train ticket, for instance, or a student needs to solve a problem at home, or a student needs to plan something. But by trying to emulate as much as possible what happens in real life, and the real communication requirements of a student, that's when I think we give the best service possible to learners. I'm also a strong proponent of using as many authentic materials as possible. They're all around us, as I mentioned here. They're all around us, videos, books, objects, just walking down the street with the classroom, solving problems, looking at them interacting with others. Authentic materials are all around us. Again, I do appreciate that course books are fundamental, are needed, are required, sometimes by policy. Sometimes they're a good tool to help teachers plan a lesson, etc. But I strongly believe that focusing all your planning and all your lessons on a course book, which might be relevant, but often is not relevant to what your students are doing, with topics that might be tedious, some might be more interesting, some not. There are limitations, basically. But we can also learn to use the course book and make it our own. Why not use an article, for instance, from a course book and say, okay, there's an interesting article here about a topic that I think my students will be interested in. The questions, however, are incredibly boring. There's a grammar exercise which is really, really useless. Use the text. Ask questions about the text. Ignore those exercises. Pick and choose what you think is important. Pick and choose what you think will benefit your students. Make it your own. Which ultimately brings me to the concept of focus on meaning versus focusing on form. Form important. It's important eventually to be an accurate speaker, to be precise with your language, especially when you are looking at higher end positions or higher end roles. But fundamentally, it's what we want to say. If we're able to convey the message clearly, we've done 90% of the job, really. There's an example here of again, I'm not asking you to go through this and necessarily read in detail all of this. This is just a screenshot from the 2020 CEFR descriptors. You will find it in a link. We will share this information with you later. So if you're really into it, you can click on that link and you can see all the new mediation and interaction descriptors and what they mean. And there's a little challenge there for you. This is just one example of in the mediation sphere, looking at mediating communication from A1, so let's call it a very beginner or very basic user of the language, all the way to C2, where you can see, you know, I can mediate effectively and naturally between members of my own and other communities, taking account of social, cultural, and social linguistic differences, and communicating finer shades of meaning. So very detailed, very precise, very nuanced ability to mediate language between communities, having awareness of social, cultural as well, cultural awareness and understanding of different cultures and social linguistic approaches. Versus an A1 where you say, I can facilitate communication by showing my welcome and interest with simple words, signs, so, you know, just waving your hand, saying hi, welcome in, you know, very, very basic language. So where on this range would we be able to position our students, for instance? And if we say we have a student, in our opinion, the student is an A2 because he can contribute to communication by using simple words, but he can also communicate a very basic main point. How do we take them from A2 to B1? What kind of tasks do we need to create to take them to A2 to B1? What supporting language then we need to take them from A2 to B1? So a little challenge for you, and again, this is obviously not something I'm asking you to do now, but it's something that you can reflect on and think about, and you're very welcome to email me about it later if you have any ideas or any suggestions. Is how do we, you know, can we create a real life emulating task for your students to take them from one level to the other? So imagine, you know, you have students at B1 level and they can do this, and you want to take them to B2. So think of a task. What situation, real life situation, do you think that it would need to be involved in to be able to move them from B1 to B2? So it's just a little task. And this is really a question that course writers, teachers, and policymakers ask themselves all the time. And therefore, you know, being creative, being open, and having an understanding of the CFR is that's why it's so important. Got a little questionnaire for you. You're very welcome to contribute in obviously I'm UK based, so I'm just outside London, where the English language industry is obviously quite a relevant industry. Every year in the UK we have about 500,450,000 students, which in UK terms is quite a large number. Obviously in Indian terms perhaps not an enormous number, but my question to you would be, you know, approximately 500,000 students come and study in a higher, you know, an undergraduate or postgraduate degree course in the year. How many students do you reckon come to study in the UK? Only English, so no university courses or anything, just to improve their English. Any guesses? And it'll be quite interesting. But I can reveal that it is, hold on, about 550,000. So every year more students, young, old, or any age, come to the UK to perfect, to improve their English language skills compared to students that come here to get a university degree or a postgraduate degree or a PhD. And they tend to study, these are statistics from English UK, which is the body that collects all those statistics. They tend to study 9 weeks on average, so they stay in the UK for an average of 9 weeks. That means that some obviously will be just here maybe for a couple of weeks during their summer break, especially younger students come over in the summer. They do their summer camps, and they could be like 2, 3, 4 weeks. But then there are more adult students. I used to teach in a school where we had students only learning English, occasionally for a year, year and a half, up to 2 years, just focusing purely on English. Obviously, some preparations, exam preparation skills as well, but not only. Interestingly, only 15% of those 550,000 are actually school children, so under what we would consider to be under the age of 16, which indicates that probably there's a lot of adults saying, oh dear, yeah, I should have learned English better when I was younger, now I have to catch up. And we all know learning a skill when we're a bit older is not as easy as when you're a very young sponge ready to absorb anything. And interestingly, how many from India of these school kids? A very, very, very small number. Only 120 junior students and we're talking about 2019, coming for a couple 2 to 3 week courses, summer courses. This number is increasing. Obviously, we need to take into account that COVID has had an incredible effect on people being able to travel. Hence why the number is quite low, much higher in the past. So hopefully the industry over here will grow. Talking about the UK only, of course, students will also travel to other English-speaking countries such as Canada, the US, South Africa, Australia to learn the language. Interestingly, here in the UK, obviously, English is taught in schools, like in India, in primary schools, secondary school. But we're not talking about English language. We're talking about English in its traditional sense, literature, how to write essays, etc., etc. Some would argue that we probably would need here in England people to actually learn to speak English properly, as the language has deteriorated quite a lot. Whether you blame social media for it or other factors, or it's just a language evolving. So let's not point the finger at anyone. But the biggest provider of English language programs, and those that are more advanced in their methodology, are actually private providers. So schools that focus, or organizations such as ours, that focus primarily on the language. So we don't teach literature, and we can if we wanted to, but our main expertise, our focus is actually in exploiting the CEFR descriptors, exploiting sounds bad, but actually making use of the student's background, their needs, their personal and professional goals, what they want to achieve with their communication skills, to then teach the language. And organizations such as ours are at the forefront of implementing new approaches, are at the forefront of taking the latest methodologies, the latest technologies, and really using them for the benefit of students. Now, we make use of teachers that have specific qualifications. You probably heard of CELTAs and DELTAs and masters in English language teaching rather than generic teaching, and linguistics. So all of our trainers have these qualifications, have these backgrounds, because they focus more on the specific sector and those approaches. And often we find that language teachers are at the forefront of teaching methodology, far more than other teachers teaching other subjects, which tend to be, and I'm generalizing here, and I don't want to offend anyone, but they tend to be more traditional in their way they teach their subject matter. Language teachers are more creative. They use the language. It's a living thing. You need to be more creative. You need to use what you're doing. So it's far less top down, and that's how we like to approach our programs. One thing that we encourage also within our organization and beyond is to work with experienced peers. We often pair teachers, you know, an experienced teacher with a less experienced teacher. That's not to say that an experienced teacher has nothing to learn. Actually, quite the opposite. Very often we have newcomers, recently qualified, people that have traveled around the world and taught English around the world. They say, oh, you know what, this has worked. There's always something to learn. I continue to learn new approaches, new ideas, new ways of managing the classroom, both physically and online, of course, which is almost the new normal, we could argue. Important also learning to create your own lessons. This is for ambitious teachers that love what they're doing, you know, and say, okay, you know, this book is okay, but I can do better. You know, this book is a starting point, but I can make a better exercise than this. And I know there are time constraints with planning. You know, are we being paid enough to plan? But it's a lot to do with also with pride and seeing what happens in the classroom and see how the learners are actually learning or responding to something that you've made up, something that you've created. See that, oh wow, there's real learning taking place because I'm actually focusing on them. I'm not just reading out from a page. We really advocate for teachers to become facilitators. That's not to say that teachers don't have the knowledge. Teachers definitely have the knowledge, should certainly have more knowledge than their students, but they should be facilitators. Help the students develop, help the students reach their own conclusions, help students notice something rather than feed them with that information. You know, particularly important for grammar, in my view. We'll get to that shortly. Grammar and vocabulary should no longer, in my view, be the main aims of lessons. As I said earlier, when do we go out in the real world and talk about grammar and talk, oh, you know, I'd like to talk about vocabulary over dinner with you. Let's have a chat about the present perfect. When does that ever happen? They are important, but they should be supporting what a student is trying to say in the classroom. Make them communicate and then make them notice, okay, how can we communicate better? What do we use to make our message clearer? And then another important aspect of what we try to do and what I believe most teachers should try to do, and I know again there are limitations in terms of, you know, our local governments, our local policy advocates require us to test. We need to test our students. There need to be hurdles because they need to get into this school, they need to get into that university, they need to get this exam passed, they need to do this. But you are not going to improve a student by testing them. You know, I can take 100 tests. If no learning takes place before the testing, my results will be the same. Very, very. I'll get accustomed to the test format, but I will not be learning anything new. So we need to teach, and we can certainly teach better than we do now, very often. And that's why we advocate also the learn by doing experience, and this has a very strong implications in with you know, the online realm. Obviously, a lot of teachers have been involved in online teaching. We know that, and it's a new world. But why not exploit this? So much time is spent in any case in real life by students, by people, by everybody. So why not use the online domain as our new normal setting? The online, you know, we have communication online all the time. We're on WhatsApp all the time. We're on writing emails left and right. That's why, again, where the CEFR comes in and creates all these new band descriptors for online communication. And that's where we can still 100% exploit task-based learning, communicative approaches to teaching in the online domain. We just need to adapt some of our technologies and adapt some of our activities, but we can still definitely focus on production, interaction, comprehension, and mediation. What we've done at Live English, for instance, and this is just a case study, very brief information here. Obviously, there's far more detailed. If anybody's interested, of course, please do contact us. We've worked, for instance, with some groups of schools in the south of India, and we're looking at tier 2 or 3 cities. So we don't necessarily and only work with the high-end schools. By all means, we're here to help any school at any level. And where we've put our teachers in partnership with local teachers in engaging dynamic live lessons into classrooms, because of the pandemic, also in the homes of the students. And the ideal setting would be with you in your classrooms, and our teacher connected live, delivering sessions and working with the local teacher also as a follow-up. And pre-lessons to understand student needs, follow-up activities, and also exchange best practice. So an opportunity for the teachers on the ground to have access to the most recent approaches and methodologies with some of our UK-based teachers. We working with the local team to tailor our programs so that they are suited to the grade system, and incorporate our CFR communicative approaches to things. So yeah, there's a lot we've done, and there's a lot more that we would like to be able to do in cooperation with the institutions around India and beyond, of course. A few practical tips. As I said, don't worry, I will be sharing this presentation with you so you can read it all again later. But for instance, I've got some tips here on how, just very brief example. How do you make grammar communicative? For instance, what we talk about, the flipped classroom. So why not ask students to research a grammar rule a day in advance before you're thinking of introducing it or teaching it? And then on the actual day of the lesson, put them in small groups, ask them to compare their findings, and then produce perhaps a poster or produce a little presentation where they describe the rule. So you see, they're not using, they're not describing the rule in terms of, oh, this plus this, but they actually have to use language, their own communicative skills, to actually describe it and talk to the others. And importantly, we're not asking them, okay, how does it work? Present perfect. Okay, verb to have plus past participle. No, we're not asking them that. That could be part of it, but asking, okay, why are we using it? What do you think the user is trying to say? So let them understand, let them digest the reason why something is used, and what message they're trying to convey. We're very strong proponents of task-based learning, so setting tasks where, again, students are put in groups, the teacher's a moderator giving instructions. But then where the teacher comes in again is at the very end, in the extension phase. So, okay, that's great, class, but how can we say this better? Okay, that's where you extend their knowledge. They've reached the capacity of what they can do, and that's where you come in and say, okay, that's a great way of putting it, but you can also say it this way, you can also say it this way, and that's when you'll see students making notes without you having to ask them. Because what they're doing is absorbing information that they say, oh, right, that's exactly what I want to say, that's exactly how I want to do it, and they will make notes. And you don't need to say make notes, guys. They will make them automatically because it's relevant to them, it's relevant to what they want to say. And pronunciation as well, of course. I'm not going to go too much in detail here, but obviously model and implementation, lots of games that are available, drilling games, having examples, looking at natural language, lexical chunks, etc. And of course, that's where us as Live English, we can also come into place to help you, support you with real life examples, assist the teachers, and deliver live sessions where students can have access to that live model. So what we do at Live English, and I hope you'll find this interesting and useful, and you're very welcome to bring this back to your respective organizations, and we're here to help and assist. So we augment English teaching in schools through live online intervention with our UK-based trainers. And as I tried to describe earlier, we introduce students, we introduce methodologies, we introduce students, to different methodologies, and we look at different approaches with the aim to make learners better learners, more independent learners, better communicators. We don't come in and take over teaching, we contribute to the teaching. So our approach is that of liaising with the local team of teachers and the academic team behind it, the administrators, the principals, and with them agree a first phase of timetables and a duration, almost like a pilot program where we start working together with us delivering some sessions to contribute, to support, to integrate what excellent job the teachers are already doing in the classroom. And then we have a number of touch points whereby then we can look at creating and configuring longer term programs and working collaboratively in years to come. That's our aim, to establish solid partnerships with schools and work for months and years after, because obviously new students will arrive, new students will need support, and that's what we're there for. And these are our goals, and obviously once again develop programs that are relevant in partnership with the local schools. Basically that really is the gist of what we do at LivEnglish.co.uk. Now, if you have any questions, comments, and opinions, there's different ways we can do it. Of course, now I think soon BJ will open up. So if there are any questions right here, right now, really happy to discuss some. But the alternative is also for you to email me personally at john@livenglish.co.uk. If during the session some of the questions I asked were intriguing and you want to explain, you want to share some expertise or share some opinions of how you would resolve certain tasks, please do email me. We also have a team in India. Very simple email address, india@livenglish.co.uk, where you can get in touch, either email, not only to respond to my questions or my challenges, but also if you want more information about how we can work with your school and your administrators, and as I said, we work with all sorts of schools, all sorts of levels, and we're very, very flexible, and I believe a great opportunity for the improvement, ultimately, as I said, of students, but also of the teaching team and the school as a whole, in terms of its reputation, its ability to prepare students for the world outside school, really, whether it's in employment or academia. Yeah, Vijay, I'll get back to you. I think my presentation finishes here. I'd like to thank you all for listening, of course, and I look forward to hearing from you. And as I said, if you have any questions right here, right now, I'm quite happy to dedicate the next 10 to 15 minutes to any comments or questions you may have.
Thank you very much, John, for this very insightful presentation on both the CEFR framework as well as what teachers can do to improve their teaching and learning methods in schools. So I would open the forum for the audience to ask questions, and you can use the Q&A tab to post questions, and we'll be happy to take this. Now, while you gather your questions, John, I had a question that I wanted to ask, which is,
Sure.
I primarily work through my organization in the college segment, and in that space, the first year, students who are entering college as part of their first year are expected to have at least a B2 level of CEFR to be successful in college, because most colleges here are using English as the medium of instruction, and B2 is the expectation at the entry level. And when students are about to graduate out, when campus recruitment happens, the expectation is C1 or C2. So if a student is not at B2 when they enter college, they're finding it difficult not only to thrive in college, but also they're not able to reach the C1, C2 levels beyond. So is
Yeah.
there something that schools can do in the last 2 years of study, which is year 11 and year 12, to kind of boost the outcomes, irrespective of where they currently might be, to push them to B2 and beyond?
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously quite a few things that schools can do. If we observe the CFR, and if we look at in detail at what B2 and above means, particularly when we look at C1 and fundamentally when we look at C2, most of the descriptors revolve around the level of sophistication of the language. So that's where really those skills, those sort of finer skills that involve creativity, involve critical thinking, because obviously critical thinking, it's easy to say, oh, you know, you have critical thinking, but what is it in reality? Critical thinking describes the ability of a person to understand a concept, digest it fully, and then to be able to analyze it with its own mind and say, yeah, okay, I can see the pros and cons, and I can and I can deliver a very sophisticated output in terms of what I believe to be right or wrong, or fine, or anything in between, really. So the finer shades, you know, there's not all black and white, anything in between. So the C2 really is about being able to describe that anything in between in a very, very precise and sophisticated way. So what schools would really need to do, and I think it probably starts even before age, grades 11 and 12, is to implement programs and support that allows students to refine those skills, to include those skills. And obviously the topics will change. A grade 3 or grade 4 student's critical thinking will revolve around certain areas, certainly not around describing how a machine works, an engineer, and a device works. But I think it's gradual work so that the students become more aware. So it goes beyond pure language, and I think that's what the CFR tries to do. It goes beyond, learning literature or a skill or being able to complete a task. It really is about, I own the language, I own it, and I'm able to communicate those finer shades of meaning. That's where, modestly, of course, we try and support schools as well, where we can come in with experts. Also at the higher grades, grade 11 and 12, there's no limitation, where we can also come in and say, okay, this is we give more sophisticated input. We challenge the students more, both linguistically and in terms of the topics, and really try to, make them more aware of themselves and their beliefs through the means of language. That's where we think those skills are generated. That's where they will be better prepared to tackle those challenges at university level.
Thanks, John. So I have another question from Gurpreet, who's asking, how are all your classes online, or do teachers travel to India?
Okay, so the vast majority of our classes are online. Our teachers are UK based, and therefore, there's no reason why there could not be a project where we can send students abroad for instance, some workshops or from seminars for periods of time. But the vast majority of our teaching is done online. Very successful, I would say. Technology is amazing these days, so it really feels like it's live. It is live, actually. It feels that the distance is really shortened. The reason why also we limit the number of trips abroad. Myself, I'm available to come to India occasionally as well, run seminars and workshops and live classes. Most of our teachers are highly experienced teachers with many years of experience, and therefore, there's less likely to be, the newly qualified person who just wants to travel around the world and experience life. Sometimes not fantastic teachers, but they're just going around. So most of our teachers are really highly qualified and experienced ones, and therefore professionals who know what they're doing and who achieve fantastic results online.
I'd like to point out to Gurpreet that the screenshot you see on the screen now is actually a live session where there is the teacher from UK. I think Haley is there, and then the teacher of that particular class is also present. She's also the facilitator, and the students are there. So there's close to 30 students in that class. We've just screenshotted one screen, so there are more students than what you see on the screen there.
Yep.
So this is one-to-many live kind of a Zoom webinar kind of a session. The students also turn on their video cameras and interact. There's also sessions where the students are seated in a classroom in the school, and the trainers from the UK deliver the class live, and then the local facilitator would kind of engage and facilitate activities, handout-based learning, and things like that.
Yeah,
so that was to answer Gurpreet's question. I have another question from Jency. She's asking if there is any certification at the end of our training, live English training programs.
Yes, so I mean, we can certainly, we provide certification. Obviously, this is CEFR certification. It's a LivEnglish.co.uk certificate that refers to what a student is able to do according to the CEFR level. So obviously it will show A2, anything between A1 to C2, depending obviously on the achievement of the student. What I would like to underline, and I think is very, very important, is this certification that we provide, obviously to the schools and to the students ultimately, is a certification which is a combined effort of what our teachers and fundamentally the teachers on the ground will decide. Our teachers in the UK will have access potentially once or twice a week to your students. You have access to them on a daily basis. So anything that will be given to students will be something that is agreed. That's why we want to work with the local teaching team, because we want to make sure that we get it right. And obviously, if a student, you might have students in the same class that have slightly different levels. That happens all the time. And therefore we want to make sure that we are precise in what we do and accurate, and that's why we work with your teachers to finalize those scores and then hand to the students a certification.
Thank you, John. I have another question from Ramanathan. He's asking if this is an additional training program, or is it part of the classroom training that is delivered as part of the curriculum for a particular class, which is probably, I think, the grade.
Yeah. Understood. So we work quite flexibly with schools. So different models are available. And again, it really depends on the needs of the school. It really depends on the challenges that the school faces and the limit, obviously the policies that they need to follow. So we work in a full range of options, starting from top-up courses that integrate. For instance, well, the example that you look at here, the screenshot is something that we do bi-weekly with all grades in this group of schools in the south of India. These are not necessarily part of their curriculum, but we use them to maximize communicative skills, maximize pronunciation skills, accent, and all the things that I was describing earlier during the presentation earlier on. But we can also work with the school and the teaching team so that the effort can be combined. So if the teaching team and the school says, you know what, we could really do with support also delivering the curriculum, we could have, for instance, a teacher teach one of our sessions a week focusing on the curriculum that needs to be delivered, then we can certainly do that as well.
Thank you, John. We have 2 more minutes in case anyone else has a question. We'd happy to take it. If not, we'll be sending you a recording of this webinar to your email address, and you can check it again in case you miss certain parts of it. And you can also reach out to us on india@livenglish.co.uk in case you wish to know more about how we can work with your school. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar and taking the time out today. And thank you very much, John, for presenting in this session. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And yeah, I look forward to liaising with all of you in the near future.
Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.